Recently, the Australian government petitioned the U.S. administration on behalf of one of their citizens, Julian Assange, to drop long-standing espionage charges. Joe Biden said he'd consider it. I'm Larry Fedoruk, and this is Later That Same Life. Each weekly podcast is a different topic, discussion, or story from our lives.
Season 12, Chapter 11, Assange.
The saga of Julian Assange is fascinating to me. Is he a hero or villain? Friend or foe? Journalist or jackal? A leader in the fight for freedom of the press? Or just some fame-seeking opportunist? I don't know. I don't know Julian Assange. We've never met. I don't have the benefit granted from sitting with a person face to face for even at least 15 minutes, after which you can walk away with at least a small sense of where their heart and head are at. Assange has been a prisoner for about the last 15 years. First, figuratively, as a diplomatic fugitive from justice, living in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, England, and then literally in a London prison, as he battled a U.S. request for his extradition to face American espionage charges. The U.K., like Canada, will not extradite a suspected criminal to a country where they might face the death penalty. If you can guarantee that they will not, generally the paperwork is done quickly and the suspect is on his way. The U.S., at least at first, could not make a satisfactory guarantee. Yeah, if you send him to us, we might kill him. That's how pissed we are about what he did. What did he do? Well, before I get into all of that, let me say that we can't be certain that he is wrongfully accused. Did he break a law? The law is the law, even when we don't like it. It has to be, otherwise order is replaced by chaos. And the law is the law until we change it. What is fascinating to me about this case is the extremity it has taken, the length of time it has gone on unresolved. At one point in this long story, the Swedish government attempted to extradite Assange to that country to face sexual assault charges. Again, we don't really know if Julian Assange is some sort of sex offender, because if he is, that is not to be forgiven. Assange, however, framed those allegations as an international workaround to get him into the United States. Sweden could guarantee the UK that Assange would not face the death penalty there, but then they could just turn around and send him to the United States. It seemed like Assange's assessment was correct. Again, we don't know for sure. But in 2019, Swedish authorities announced suddenly that their investigation was now closed because, quote, the evidence has weakened considerably due to the long period of time that has elapsed, unquote. What the heck does that mean? Truth fades over time? Is that what they are saying? It was when those Swedish allegations first surfaced that Julian Assange was offered asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. Small room includes tiny bathroom with shower, kitchenette, separate bedroom, no pets please. Well, okay, you can bring your cat, which he did. James was his cat. So WikiLeaks under Assange had published U.S. top-secret documents. That was in 2010, but there was no U.S. charges. Those didn't come until almost a decade later. But immediately, Sweden brought rape and assault charges forward. Assange was detained in London, but then released on bail. But when it seemed like he might face extradition to Sweden, Ecuador offered him asylum. And you don't even have to go to Ecuador. We have a little piece of property in London. I think we all know how those embassy rules work. Once a country has an embassy or some sort of consulate in another country, then the law of the embassy country applies on that property. So in other words, Ecuador isn't charging Assange with anything, so he's free to roam the building. But if he tries to go down the block to the pub, or even step out onto the curb for the morning paper, you're under arrest. Ecuador seems like a strange choice to take up the battle of freedom of the press. I mean, they are a democracy, and unicameral. That's not exactly relevant to this story, but I just learned that word, unicameral. It means that they have only one legislative body. Not a Senate and a Congress, or a House of Commons and a House of Lords, just one house. Unicameral. Use that word, impress your friends. Ecuador said that they had shared Assange's concerns that the charges of rape and assault were a cover to punish the alleged espionage, and that this whole thing was turning into a political persecution. So for 7 years, beginning in June of 2012, Assange has this tiny flat in central London. But it was rent-free, and hey, they allowed cats. Every once in a while, Julian would appear in the window and wave to the ever-diminishing group of supporters out front. In late 2016, Pamela Anderson visited Assange in what she later described as a frisky, fun, alcohol-fueled night. At some point, she suggested that the two of them get married on the embassy front steps. Note that his little apartment was equipped with security cameras. Perhaps that's why the evening didn't go beyond frisky. Maybe Pamela Anderson has become camera shy in her later years. After 7 years, the Ecuadorian government finally allowed British police to enter the embassy to execute the original arrest warrant. Was this some change in international diplomacy? Well, maybe. But according to the Ecuadorian foreign minister, during the time of asylum, Julian Assange was rude, ungrateful, and meddling. Assange allegedly played football and rode his skateboard in the halls. At some points came to blows with staff and security. That's a bad tenant. You're out. In 2019, it was off to a London jail where they don't put up with those kind of shenanigans. So, other than being a lousy house guest, why does the U.S. want to punish Julian Assange? Julian Assange is accused of espionage for publishing sensitive American military documents, the release of which many agree did endanger the lives of American service personnel. That was in 2010, on the site called WikiLeaks. As you most likely know, WikiLeaks is not affiliated with Wikipedia. Wiki is a Hawaiian word. It means quick. You can't copyright a word. Used as a prefix, Wikipedia means, quick reference. WikiLeaks, quick and easy access to leaked classified documents. Not sure I would have called it WikiLeaks. The prefix doesn't seem to apply as well in this situation, in my opinion. Like, Donald Trump is a wiki-sexual, that makes sense. Wikipedia, that makes sense, but WikiLeaks? I don't get it. Anyway, by 2010, it was a known journalistic entity. Julian Assange was born in Australia and was a self-proclaimed teenage hacker. Assange said that by age 17, he had already read many classified and sensitive documents due to early computer skills. Assange at 17, that puts us at about the early 1990s, a time when very few people had access to computers, and even fewer had one in their home. It's funny, if you draw a 10,000-kilometer line almost straight west from Assange's teenage Australian bedroom, there was another 17-year-old in South Africa, also playing on early computer models. That guy was Elon Musk. Musk and Assange. Obviously, their careers took different trajectories. By 2005, Musk was already the billionaire founder of PayPal and had just become an early investor in the Tesla Motor Company. At that same time, Julian Assange had founded WikiLeaks in Australia, and they began publishing sensitive and classified documents in the name of journalism, freedom of the press, and freedom of information. In 2010, Assange and WikiLeaks published about 500,000 U.S. classified documents, all at once, related to American involvement in wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Within days of that, he was a wanted man. Well, more like a person of interest. As I said, he wasn't formally charged by the U.S. until years later. Working in the UK at this point, Assange remained a free man, despite the fact that Sweden had almost immediately began extradition attempts on those sexual assault charges. After about a year and a half, the court system takes a while, the British High Court granted the Swedish request, and that's when Assange moved into that little piece of Ecuador right in the heart of London. By 2019, when Ecuador had had just about enough of their deadbeat tenant, UK authorities sentenced him to 50 weeks in prison for skipping bail back in 2012. Even after the 50 weeks, he remained in custody over the issue of American extradition. Everything got delayed due to COVID. The U.S. finally guaranteed that Assange would be treated humanely in the American penal system. British High Court said, okay, good enough for us, but also then granted Assange the right to appeal the extradition. Then things get even stupider. A higher court then denied his right to appeal, and then the British government stepped in and ordered that he be extradited. Only a few weeks ago, Assange's lawyers launched a final legal bid for him to stay in England. This is where this new development comes in, and it's why Assange is in the news once again. It's why I'm talking about him. The Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese, in office only about the past 2 years. He actually made the freedom of Julian Assange part of his election campaign. Only days ago, he made a formal request to the Biden administration that the U.S. drop all charges against Aussie Julian Assange. Biden's response, thinking about it, considering it.
Well, this is an encouraging statement from President Biden. I have said that we have raised, on behalf of Mr. Assange, Australia's national interests, that enough is enough, that this needs to be brought to a conclusion, and we've raised it at each level of government in every possible way.
Did Julian Assange and WikiLeaks break the law? What is the law? Is it the publishing of classified documents or the endangerment of American lives? Many feel yes, they did. It is also said, though, that the publication of those documents in 2010 exposed American military criminal activity, and that the U.S. deserved to be called out. Both of these ideas can be true at once. I've always wondered, was it the sheer volume of documents? 500,000? Were there just too many and not enough staff to vet them properly? Couldn't they accomplish both, the journalistic mission of uncovering corruption without endangering human lives? Was it carelessness, laziness? And that's if, in fact, the publication actually did that. Did it really endanger lives? I don't recall any documentation saying that lives were lost as the result of WikiLeaks. If there were, don't you think the charges would be greater than just espionage? Is the United States so vehement in their prosecution because they were exposed? Possibly. America. It's America and Americans first. Even Barack Obama would not budge on bringing Assange to justice. Got me to thinking, if London's Daily News got hold of the D-Day plans in 1944, would they have published them? Granted, different times indeed. But can you imagine if it was a front page on June 5th? Invasion tomorrow, details inside. Some Nazi operative having a pint in Chelsea. He'd be reading the paper, and he'd radio the information back to Hitler's bunker. The whole war would have turned out much differently. And certainly everyone at the newspaper would be hung for high treason. And most of the people would probably agree with that. Of course, it was easier then to differentiate between the good guys and the bad guys. In this modern-day case, are we to assume that America is always the good guy? That is getting tougher and tougher to do. Maybe a better example is 1971 and the Pentagon Papers. Daniel Ellsberg was a civilian military analyst working on reports about the U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. The more he found out, the less he supported the war. And eventually he leaked the so-called Pentagon Papers to the New York Times and the Washington Post. Immediately, President Richard Nixon sought and obtained a federal judge's injunction against the Times, who had to cease publishing the leaked documents. Why? The publication would be a threat to U.S. national security. In Washington, however, another federal judge disagreed, and the Post continued to publish. Because of the differences in the two decisions, it went to the U.S. Supreme Court. And that bench decided the federal government did not have a strong enough case re-security to limit freedom of the press. Print on. Ellsberg was charged. Those charges eventually dropped due to government misconduct in the case. Point is, the Times and the Post were never charged with a crime. Only the leaker, Ellsberg. Today we also use the term whistleblower. Sounds better than leaker or snitch. But yet, no matter how noble a whistleblower's cause may be, they are not allowed to break the law. Are not Assange and WikiLeaks, the Times and the Post in this case? Perhaps they made a bad decision in publishing all of the papers, but they are the press. I always wonder that in 2010, if it had been the actual Times or Post who published these papers, instead of an upstart website out of Australia, would the attitudes be the same? And who is the Ellsberg in this particular modern-day case? Well, that is another vexing part of this story to me. The person who first leaked the documents to this new Wiki media, isn't that the real criminal? Well, we know who it is. Let me refresh that story. Over the early years of WikiLeaks, Assange had developed a relationship with a U.S. intelligence officer, Bradley Manning. It was Manning who leaked all of the documents to Assange. Private Bradley Manning was actually found guilty of espionage and other crimes, sentenced to 35 years in prison. And though he was steadfast on Assange, it was actually Barack Obama who commuted the sentence of Manning to 7 years. Manning was getting out of prison about the same time that Assange was transferring from the Ecuadorian apartment to his room at the London jail. Bradley Manning became Chelsea Manning, and after the transition launched a bid for the U.S. Senate. Though unsuccessful, that is sure getting a lot of life done after committing high crimes. All while the other guy in this story is sitting in his kitchenette playing with his cat. This makes no sense. I mean, whether you consider Manning a heroic whistleblower or dastardly traitor, when you side by side Manning with Assange, the scales of justice seem out of whack.
I believe this must be brought to a conclusion and that Mr. Assange has already paid a significant price and enough is enough.
The Australian Prime Minister is right. Julian Assange has suffered enough. I'm not saying I even like the guy. I'm just saying he did his time. 7 years in a confined space in the embassy, almost a conjugal visit from Pamela Anderson. Well, that's probably worse than those minimum security white-collar prisons in the U.S. At least they get to walk around the yard occasionally. Then another 5+ years in jail in London. Well, isn't that enough of a punishment for advocating for freedom of the press? Perhaps, as I said earlier, Assange and WikiLeaks should have made some adjustments to which documents they published based on a risk to human life. You know, the press, specifically TV news channels, they do this all the time. They withhold information based on a threat to human safety. For example, when there's a guy holed up in a house with guns and hostages, media will cut away from the live shot because they might inadvertently be sharing police strategy with the guy in the house who has a TV set on watching the news. The point is, media should take into consideration human safety over being first with the big story. And I'm not saying the media should go back to the model of the 1950s and 60s, when it was reporters and editors and producers who decided what to share and what not to share about JFK, for example. We have mostly eliminated those information gatekeepers, thankfully. Daniel Ellsberg at least had his day in court. In the early 70s, the U.S. Supreme Court weighed evidence of national security against freedom of the press. None of this has happened in this particular case. Instead, Assange has served almost 15 years without any trial. Granted, a lot of that is because of his own legal maneuvering. Hero, villain, friend, foe, journalist, jackal. I don't know, but at this point I think he seems like a victim, over-victimized, for exposing war crimes allegedly committed by a world power. And he was just the conduit. The whistleblower was Chelsea Manning. While we're at it, what about Edward Snowden? Hero, villain, patriot, or traitor? Snowden didn't even try to live in anybody's embassy. He went straight to a country where America would have a tough time getting at him, Russia. 2 years ago, Putin granted Snowden permanent Russian citizenship. Yeah, Putin likes him, for now. But there's 2 calls you don't want to get from Vlad Putin, the mad monk. One is, hey, why don't you come over? I'll send a plane for you. And 2, drop by for a visit. I made some tea. It's weird. People seem to despise Julian Assange more than Edward Snowden. I don't think Assange does himself any favors. He doesn't come across as likable. WikiLeaks still exists, still publishes. It, along with Assange's huge legal bills, are covered by donations mostly, including very rich benefactors who believe in the freedom of the press. I don't know that Biden will move on this Australian request, especially during an election campaign. And after that, it is difficult to say what a president of the United States might do about Julian Assange. In other words, there's no wiki solution.
Later That Same Life is written, voiced, and produced by Larry Fedoruk. LarryFedoruk37@gmail.com. Subscribe to Larry's podcast YouTube channel. Get automatic notifications with each new episode.